Welcome. And every month we try to have a conversation around a certain topic. I'd like to say that some crazy feedback on this. I'd like to say this month we're going to be talking about a topic that many of you ask us to present on the specific plans. There are two that are running simultaneously at the moment. One for the west downtown area, another for the north downtown area of town. We have two senior planners on staff that are here to answer your questions and present to you. But before we get into those in the main event, Andy's just here for the donuts, so that sounds about right, Andy. All right. I just want to go through a couple of quick announcements. There's actually been quite a bit going on here in the city. Start off with our agenda as always. Affordable Housing Week is coming up next week. For those of you who did or didn't know that, now you do. And Affordable Housing Week is a big event with EBHO, among other partners. The city is going to be hosting three different events. In fact, there are a couple of events here at City Hall. There are a couple of groundbreakings, one for St. Paul's Commons, I think next Thursday, I believe it is, the 16th. This feedback is that bothering anybody else, the feedback, or is that just me? Sorry, just me. There's also there are a couple of panels discussing housing issues, affordability, etc. Some of my staff here are participating in those. So we do have some more information on that. If you're interested in all the events that are happening, let me or staff know and we can provide more details. I also want to touch upon another aspect of something kind of new and exciting. Lime Bike came to town out in the Shadelands Business Park a couple of months back. And as part of a citywide rollout, we're going to actually start that tomorrow. Tomorrow is Bike to Work Day. Those of you who own a bicycle, pump up the tires, take out your helmet, dust it off, and take a trip on your bike. Take it on BART if you need to. But point being is that tomorrow is National Bike to Work Day. We are participating. And as part of that event tomorrow, we're going to have Lime Bike officially roll out their citywide rollout of their program. So you're going to see, if you haven't already seen their, if you haven't already seen their green lime-colored bikes, Lime Bike, you will more prevalently as we roll that out citywide. So that's an event tomorrow. Join us at 9 a.m. tomorrow if you're interested. Out in front, right here in City Hall, we're going to have a little event and welcome your participation and attendance. So we're here today to talk about specific plans, but we have a couple of other plans that are under wraps or underway. One of which is our Economic Development Strategic Plan. We're in the middle of our impact analysis. We've got a lot of good data. We're going to start sharing some of that out with the community, I believe the end of this month or early next month, in late May, early June, with our council to tell them kind of preliminarily what we've discovered, what we've heard, where we're going. I believe we're looking to complete the Economic Development Strategic Plan by the end of the year, October-ish, November. But we haven't done one of these since 2004. So 2004, by the way, there weren't even such things as iPhones or high-speed internet or other things, just for context. But anyway, so it's been a while. That's my point. I want to talk about and transition a little bit, speaking of internet and all that. We're rolling out Open Counter. We finalized our contract. We're moving forward. That's a zoning, and also there are many other portals, but we're using the zoning portal through Open Counter, where you can, as a member of the development community or the public in general, you can log into Open Counter, and if you have an idea, if you're an entrepreneur and you want to open a business here, whether you're an independent or a national retailer or chain, you can find out, where can I do what I like to do for a living? How much is it going to cost me? Because there's going to be a running tally on the right-hand side of the screen that kind of gives you an idea, based on your information input, what sort of permits or discretionary processes you may be subject to or need. So we're rolling that out. We're in the process of uploading and getting our zoning all electronified, or whatever the term is, digitized. And once that's up and running, it'll be linked on our website. You'll be able to visit that and encourage all your friends to do the same. So we have that coming up. And I think I have, let's roll in here. Open Counter, let's see if I'm missing anything else. Wanted to say, I know we have some of our agency partners in the room. We appreciate you being here. We will be reaching out to you to incorporate your information into our new tool here to the best of our ability, so we can have an accurate reflection of, it's not just Walnut Creek, but here's the Central SAN would request or require of your project, or here's what PG&E might have you look into, permits or fees or other things. So we're trying to get this to test. We're trying to get at least one end-to-end digital submission using an old application by the end of this year. So we're working through some other things because we're also rolling out, trying to get through digital submittal for planning, or for, not for planning, but for plans, right? So we're trying to get an online digital process, which we heard from many of you would be a welcome addition or a welcome change to the way we do business. So we have Open Counter on one end, we have digital submittals on the other end, and there'll be more to come on that front, and we'll keep you posted. So as I mentioned, we're here to talk about specific plans. We have the West Downtown specific plan, and we have the North Downtown specific plan. We have a corner on the market when it comes to creativity for specific plan names. So anyway, just want to pass that along. But what's the purpose of a specific plan? So specific plans are kind of that bridge between zoning and the general plan. And of course, the general plan sets out a broader vision for development within an area or a town or whatever the case. We have our general plan 2025 that does such a thing. We then have the zoning that implements that vision. And there may be intermediary or connections between both that general plan policies and goals and some of the underlying specific zoning that's written that we use to bridge, maybe further clarify some goals or some maybe, or we tailor specific needs or interests within a plan area, for example, a specific plan area. And that's one of the ways that we can do that is through a specific plan. It can communicate more clearly a vision specific to an area, in this case, West Downtown, let's say, and the analysis and whatnot that is applicable to that area can come through in that specific plan. And we have had a lot of success in the city of Walnut Creek over the decades with specific plans and specifically build out related to those plans. We could go down the line and point to a lot of examples. But without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to the experts in the room, namely to Andy Smith, who's a senior planner for long range and transportation planning, and also then Janine Cavalli to follow, who's also a senior planner who's leading up North Downtown. Andy, come on up, take it away.
Who's this expert you're talking about?
Yeah, I don't know what I was saying. No.
Alrighty. This one, there we go. Good morning, everybody. Great slide, right? It is too early for this for me. Coffee hasn't quite kicked in. It'll get there maybe about halfway through my presentation, but I'll keep it short. There we go. Okay, so West Downtown Specific Plan. This has been going on for a rather long time, so I'm guessing that a good portion of the folks in the room here have at least heard of it, if not seen various past presentations. There's only maybe a couple of slides in here that you might have seen in the past. The rest of this is relatively new stuff. Really quick, so the West Downtown Specific Plan, which is a great name because you know where it is, just like North Downtown. Anyway, it's 172 acres, the BART station at the north, down to Olympic Boulevard, between the freeway and North California Boulevard. It's adjacent, right across the street from our downtown pedestrian retail district, of course, walking distance. And it is also walking distance from 2 city parks and a open space area, which is important because there's no place within the plan area to put a new park. But we have more than enough capacity in terms of our existing park facilities. So what have we done? Well, we started with community outreach. This has really been a community-led plan. We actually had kind of one of the high points of the original planning process was 6 community workshops that we held in some of the neighborhood churches. We had 550 participants, which is actually really quite good for this type of outreach process. We also have an online mailing list, which I suspect a number of you are already on, and if you're not, I can point you that way later. We did a lot of stakeholder outreach with the development community and others, where we had small group discussions and individual one-on-one discussions, some with our consultants so that you wouldn't feel intimidated by the big bad city being there, so you could speak your mind. And then we've also had a total of 46 public meetings, commissions, city council, committees, citizens advisory committee, all publicly noticed public meetings. So if you're ever thinking about, hey, maybe you want to become a city planner, remember that. Think twice. So let's just get into the plan. So as far as the land use plan, the land use component for the plan, I can kind of summarize by saying generally it's going to be going for a more urbanized vision, except for the Almond-Shui neighborhood. Those of you who don't know what the Almond-Shui neighborhood is, that's this little thing right here in the middle. It's a single-family and duplex neighborhood, dates back to technically back to the teens of the previous century, and it is protected under our existing general plan. And one of the main foundational points of this plan is to continue the preservation of that historic neighborhood. However, everything else around it is looking to grow upwards, basically. I can summarize by saying that really north of like Bonanza Street, the character is more residential and civic in nature. Civic, what's that? Well, there are two large churches, St. Paul's Episcopal and Walnut Creek Presbyterian. They're of course major landowners in the plan area, in the northern half of the plan area, but they are really provide really an anchor, if you will, for the neighborhood. And they're important civic institutions, and so the plan really sees them continuing in their mission, as well as St. Mary's Catholic, which is a Catholic church, which is of course down on Mount Diablo Boulevard. But this is really mainly a residential neighborhood with the two large churches. And then to the south, really a mix of uses with more of an emphasis on office, retail, and residential, primarily mixed use development, in fact. From a circulation standpoint, really the focus of the circulation plan is what's called complete streets. And what that basically means is it's a street designed for everybody to use, not just cars or not just pedestrians, but for everybody: peds, bike, transit, cars, etc. And the plan also focuses on trying to create new connections within the plan area. There are some rather large blocks within the plan area. One item that was the subject of a great deal of discussion through this planning process, and actually even prior to that, going back to the 80s, was the concept of having a bridge over Ignacio Valley Road to the BART station. Ultimately, the City Council has directed us to not include that. We're actually removing almost every reference to it in the final version of the revised draft plan, and that's mainly for feasibility reasons. Some highlights: the circulation plan identifies some potential new drives or paths. These were originally identified as potential new quiet streets, but through the direction from the City Council, we've been incorporating some flexibility where they could be, a bike and ped path, or it could be a quiet street, really more up to what the developer wants to do in that area. They don't play into the actual traffic circulation for the plan as a whole, for the plan area. And then we've also identified two new bike paths that would definitely be bike paths. This one here is along the Caltrans right-of-way, or in the Caltrans right-of-way, I should say, between Olympic and Mount Diablo Boulevard. Over here, this is shown as running across the front of CVS. Basically, it's following the old railroad right-of-way, where in the ground there are two very large pipes. One is a 5-foot diameter sewer pipe, and the other is a 2-foot diameter natural gas pipe. And those are not likely to move, and you can't build on top of them. So the idea is, hey, let's turn lemons into lemonade, and have a pathway through there that'll actually benefit the development of that property as well as the community as a whole. One important thing I'd like to point out is that the locations, the lines on the map, they are not exact locations, and we've got all sorts of disclaimer language on the map itself. In the plan, we're adding more at the direction of the City Council. They wanted to be very clear that we're not at this point laying out a precise alignment for any of these roads or paths, and it's really going to be dependent on just working with the developers of those areas to fit within their development scheme, something that's workable for all, basically. Building height. We're seeing some increases in the building height through this plan. And by the way, the plan is still in draft form. Basically, the southern portion along Mount Diablo Boulevard and Olympic, we have some capacity to go up to 89 feet, maximum 6 stories. When I say capacity, what I mean by that is that there's a voter initiative from the mid-'80s, Measure A, locks height limits in place. They can't go above what they were in 1985. And this area, the height limits had actually been lowered in the late 80s, and so we're proposing that we take those height limits back up. However, in order to go over 65 feet in height, the plan's calling for the provision of community benefits. Okay, what does that mean? Basically, for example, in the southern area here, if the plan gets adopted as currently proposed, you have a 65-foot height limit. You can build up to 65 feet by right. You want to go higher than that, up to that 89-foot limit. Your project has to provide some sort of a community benefit. What that is basically something over and above what is normally required of the development. So, when you're doing new development, well, you have to build the sidewalk and street frontage improvements. Everybody has to do that. Community benefit would be something beyond that. So, for example, maybe it could be additional affordable housing, or it could be, hey, if your project's here, you'll help pay for some of the improvements to Oakland Boulevard, which actually is going to be a rather expensive project because there's some real infrastructure needs there, just as an example. So basically, it's an incentive, if you will, we're providing an incentive for the development community to provide additional public benefits through additional development capacity. Likewise with FAR, floor area ratio. It's the ratio of floor area to lot area. We're actually seeing some significant increases here. The FARs in our current general plan are somewhat on the low side, and so we're actually looking at increasing them in the purple areas to 3.0. So basically it means you can have 3 times as much floor area as you have lot area. 2.5 in the green. Community benefits would be required if you're going over 1.5. And that 1.5, just as an example, that is automatically an increase over what's currently in place. So everybody's getting an increase. It's just if you want a really large increase, you have to provide community benefits. Residential density, also seeing increases here, fairly significant. 88 dwelling units an acre in the orange areas, 88 as well in the purple, 116 units an acre potential in the red area. Again, there's this community benefits requirement if you want to go over 58 units an acre. Some of you may be wondering, 88, 116, 58, what's with these round numbers, or not round numbers? That's just a factor of how our zoning ordinance regulates density in terms of amount of lot area per unit. So these odd numbers translate to round numbers by that metric. So it doesn't really matter. I'm just trying to explain that. And you may also be wondering, hey, what's the deal with that asterisk on the 88? Does it have anything to do with Roger Maris? Okay, there are a few baseball fans in here. No, it's got nothing to do with him and his home run record. Basically, that's a mixed-use area, so it's not purely multifamily residential. There is a requirement for ground floor commercial uses in new development there. So I just want to highlight, if you're looking at Mount Diablo Boulevard and thinking, hey, I can put an apartment building there, not entirely. You can have a mixed-use apartment building. So let me quickly go over some sketches, and I know a few of you in the room have seen these already. These kind of just show potential, what could happen under this plan if it's adopted in its current form. So this is the corner of Lacassie and California. It's across the street from the Target. Potential for a significant increase in height and intensity, floor area, and density. Mixed-use development expected along this corridor. Along Mount Diablo Boulevard, where we have the potential to see the most dramatic change, you'll see really going from the current 1940s and 50s highway strip commercial development to a more urbanized and certainly denser vision for the area. And then our corner here at Mount Diablo and California, again showing what's potential. And here's the potential area where there's the gas, or the 2 pipelines in the ground, being converted into a pathway with admittedly very small people. I don't think those are drawn quite to scale. So we're kind of in the final stretch here in terms of the review process of the plan. I mentioned, we've been working on this thing for a long time. Yeah, 2011, that's not a typo. That was when we applied for the grant. This project's been largely grant funded. But the actual really work started in 2012. We had an initial public draft published in late 2014. It was kind of a little more rough than I would have liked, and a little more rough than the city council would have liked, and so they directed us to go through a lengthy process involving all 5 city commissions to review on a chapter-by-chapter basis that draft plan and come up with a revised and updated draft plan, and it also reflects changes that have happened in the past few years. So the revised draft was published in February, and fingers crossed, and knock on wood, wood and salt over my shoulder and everything else. In theory, adoption, we're anticipating adoption by the council this summer, and actually feeling pretty good about that in terms of potential timing wise. So I'm seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, but wait, there's more. Community benefits. The plan has kind of gone in various different directions based on input from the commissions, committees, and the council as to how that would be implemented. What's in that draft plan, the revised draft plan, I should say, what is what you could call a negotiation-based program, where basically you as a developer, you want to, achieve some of those higher increases in density FAR height limits. You propose something, you offer the city something in terms of the community benefit. We have a list of kind of types of things we'd like to see in the plan, but there's not like a points-based system or anything like that. And then there's essentially a negotiation process through with the city council to determine how much of a increase do you get for the benefit you're providing. The city council most recent direction is that they wanted a little more certainty than that, and that was largely in response actually to comments that we received from the development community, who also wants more certainty. And in fact, it's in line with staff's original recommendation on this to provide a little more certainty. So the council's directed us, we're on track to adopt the plan, have the plan adopted potentially in July. But the city council wants us to work with their housing and community development committee, which is 2 council members, to create a more specific community benefits program than this purely negotiation-based program that we have currently. And so there's one of the first steps that we're going to be doing is actually reaching out to the development community to hear what do you think would make the plan successful? What types of benefits are feasible? What types of community benefits are feasible for a developer to provide? And the council is actually very, very interested in hearing that. We don't have a date yet set for our first meeting, but I would love to get your business cards so I can, if I don't already have you on our mailing list, I'd like to be able to, in a relatively short amount of time, reach out to you and bring you into this discussion, because it's really an important one. So with all that said, let's get to the slide that you're probably most interested in. Where are the opportunities? Now, a disclaimer. Obviously, this is all private development. This is not old school redevelopment where the city comes in, Robert Moses coming in with bulldozers. This is basically, we're trying to set the stage from a regulatory and guidance standpoint, and then ultimately it's private development and private landowners. So where I say there's an opportunity, there might not be, because maybe you have a landowner that just has zero interest in doing anything with their property. So with that said, we see some opportunity for multifamily infill along LaCassie and Trinity. I've not included this because here's the Mercer. I don't expect that to go anywhere anytime soon. But basically seeing some opportunities along Trinity and LaCassie, and then also down below the Almond Shoey neighborhood. This is Sharp Avenue. This is actually all under one ownership, family ownership. And there's some properties here where we're upzoning multifamily that we're upzoning along Oakland Boulevard north of the Mount Diablo corridor. Also some opportunities for mixed use along Oakland Boulevard. Fair bit of flexibility there, quite a bit of additional floor area that's being granted through the specific plan. There's some substantial buildings there, but there's also literally an abandoned building, an abandoned office building on Oakland Boulevard. And so there's some potential there where the specific plan is really trying to spur investments in that area. However, that all said, the greatest increases that we're seeing in terms of development potential is in the southern portion of the plan area along Mount Diablo and Olympic Boulevards. Particularly, we have the mixed use opportunities along Mount Diablo Boulevard and our favorite parking lot, the CVS site over here at California and Olympic. Again, I'm not highlighting this area where you've got Cino's building and the what was that, California Plaza? I don't know, the 1331, 1333 North California, because those aren't going anywhere. So I wouldn't expect to highlight that as an opportunity, but there is some real opportunity along Mount Diablo Boulevard. If you are eyeing this area, really keep an eye out towards the aggregation of parcels, because we have a lot of small, narrow properties under multiple ownership. In the middle of the block, kind of centered on Alpine, there's some real opportunity for multifamily development. It's the plan's calling for that to be multifamily zoning, as I mentioned earlier, up to 116 units an acre, which is fairly dense. And then there's some office opportunities along the freeway. So with that, I don't know if we're going to do Q&A afterwards. Do it now if you like. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Should we have the mic passed around? Or if I've put you to sleep, that's okay too. Yeah, I'll get you.
Will we have access to that slide presentation?
Yeah, sure.
So, okay.
All right, I put you all to sleep. No questions.
Do we know when the HCD subcommittee is going to meet, and is that going to happen before? It's going to happen before the plan is adopted, correct?
No, actually, the intent is to have it have the two things occur concurrently, but we're expecting the plan to be adopted prior to the work finishing with the HCD committee. Don't have a date yet for that first meeting. That's why I'm interested in getting business cards so that I can, if I don't have you already on our mailing list, I can reach out to you.
Hey, I'm curious. For the office, it would seem like office closer to the BART would be ideal. Is it just that we don't have enough land, or is it the height limits? Why is the office not closer to BART?
So everything is more ideal near the BART station, and we actually do have. There's a lot of office, of course, right around the BART station. Currently, we do also have mixed use. Zoning is intended to occur, for example, in this area here and along California. However, for the plan area, this is an established residential neighborhood, and so we really didn't, and the community didn't see it as appropriate to incorporate, to bring office development within that residential neighborhood. Down here, it's not the most ideal place for housing because of the proximity to the freeway. I mean, in some cases, you're practically underneath the freeway because there's the high flyovers for the intersection. And in fact, housing along here would throw off the entire traffic issue. And we would have to do some massively expensive street improvements and enlargements to accommodate housing there. So, yeah.
Are you adjusting the commercial and residential parking requirements?
The number of parking spaces we're not changing through this plan. However, the way that you can provide them is changing. Actually, no, let me take that back. We are actually looking at reducing the parking requirement for office development that's within a half mile of the BART station. There's a parking reduction zone, if you will, that does this right now for areas around BART where office uses are allowed. We're basically expanding that reduction zone to include areas where we are now going to allow office if you're within 100 feet, I mean, not 100 feet, a half mile of the BART station. For everything else, the parking requirements at the moment are staying the same, but in the case of multifamily, we're looking at allowing by right tandem parking so that if you have two spaces for a particular unit, they can be one in front of the other. Also proposing to allow mechanized stacked parking by right so that you don't have to go to the Planning Commission for that, but the actual number's not changing. That said, as a separate process, and actually through a separate grant, our department's working on a transportation demand management strategic plan. It's being headed up by my coworker Ozzie Arce, who unfortunately he's not here, he's getting ready for Bike to Work Day tomorrow. And that's a citywide effort, but really focusing on the core area. And there's three main components to that plan, but one of them is right-sizing our parking standards. And so we will actually be looking at our parking requirements. We've noticed that, particularly with multifamily, a lot of these new developments have large parking garages that aren't very well used. So, gee, maybe we're requiring too much parking.
How is the transition taking place between the perimeter of the historical neighborhood and the increased heights?
So that's a good question, actually, and that was another subject that was, or another area that was subject to intense conversation and discussion over the years. We actually have a buffer zone around the neighborhood that was adopted in 2016, kind of while this plan was in process. And I don't have the graphic with me, but it essentially calls for a sloping height limit. So the boundary, you can kind of make it out just because it's where there's no color. The boundary of the neighborhood's there, and essentially there's a height limit as measured from that boundary line of the neighborhood that on the south and west, you go up, I think, 20 feet, just like normal, but then there's a 45-degree height plane, if you will, where the building would have to step back. On the north and east sides, it's the third and higher floors have to step back. I think it's 10 feet, I want to say. It's just a single step back. So that's already been taken care of.
All right, seeing no other questions, we're going to move on to the other specific plan in the room.
Is it
Thank
south
you, Andy.
downtown? East downtown? Oh,
No,
north,
south down-
north downtown.
South downtown is coming.
That's next. Yes.
Right. But Janine Cavalli is a senior planner working on our North Downtown specific plan. And Janine, take it away.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Janine Cavalli, and I'm a senior planner with the City of Walnut Creek. And I'm looking forward to giving you a preview of the North Downtown specific plan. I'll first just give you a quick update of where we are in the process before then giving you a preview of what's to come and what's proposed for the next 30 years. And then I'll close with how you can stay involved and participate in some of our upcoming meetings. In terms of the process, we are currently drafting the public draft of the specific plan. It integrates about 2 years of planning. We don't quite have 46 public meetings, but that involved about 11 advisory committee meetings, about 15 focus groups and stakeholder interviews, 2 joint sessions with the Planning Commission and Transportation Commission, and 2 study sessions with City Council. And we anticipate a public draft of the document being out on the street around late June. So before I get into the preview, I should give you a little orientation here of where the plan is located. So Andy was just going over the West Downtown specific plan, which is located right here. So, and we are just about here right now. So it's just north of us. It goes up to Parkside, about the Iron Horse Trail, Civic. Oh, okay, thanks. I thought we were having a race. Up California. Great. And so the proposed land use north of YVR, I'm going to kind of, a lot of what I've talked about is going to kind of split between what's happening north of YVR and south of YVR. So north of YVR, a lot of the land use pattern is going to be pretty similar to what it is today. The red area is the auto sales and service district. We're looking at making that a bit more consolidated and compact, but it largely maintains a similar footprint of what it is today. It's surrounded by the office uses shown in blue, and then the Golden Triangle remains the same, shown in that green there. And then south of YVR is where we're going to see a lot more changes to the land use pattern. So there, we're proposing it transform into more mixed use development. And the purple shown here is the mixed use commercial, where you have ground floor retail and commercial with either residential or office above. And then the yellow is ground floor retail with residential above. And so this southern area, again, is really supposed to be better connected with traditional downtown and create a more walkable, pedestrian-oriented district. We also have 2 special districts that we're proposing. One is shown here in the red along Pine Street, was what we're calling Maker's Row. So there is where we're going to encourage more handcrafted custom manufacturing uses. Some of that's already occurring in the area. There was a microbrewery there. There's also a bike manufacturing near there. So really it's intended to not only be a place where people can produce these types of goods, but also to sell their products. And then the other special district is located down here in the blue area. That's the Arts and Entertainment District. It goes from Carlbach on the north, Broadway on the east, and Locust on the west. And so that's really intended to build off of some of the synergy from Lesher Center and allow some more, restaurant uses, art galleries, live music, and we're also proposing a plaza out along Giamona. So on the north side of Giamona, we're proposing Giamona Square, and that will allow for some outdoor dining, maybe some more live music. The farmers market could spill out into that space as well. So really creating a community gathering space there. And these special districts, the special districts are really intended to create kind of memorable, unique spaces within the North Downtown that will draw people there with a unique character, places for people to gather, and really intended to be vibrant, attractive, fun places, and community focal points within North Downtown. I want to talk a little bit more about the auto sales area. Even though the plan is keeping the auto sales district there, really are intending for that area to transform into a more urban, compact area. So, instead of a lot of what you see now of the larger outdoor display parking lots, we'd like to see that transform into multi-story, maybe showrooms, parking structures, that type of thing. And one of the things that could facilitate this is to have a multi-structure garage that is shared amongst a lot of the dealers for their vehicle storage. And so that would allow some of that land to free up for some of the other uses that we're envisioning, particularly where in the south of YVR, we're hoping some of those auto dealers will elect to move either north of YVR or even beyond along North Main to allow some of the more mixed-use district to occur. So similar to Andy's plan that he just described, we are doing across the board, we're reducing setbacks and we are increasing FARs to increase the development potential throughout. However, if you want to go beyond that, you can get additional FAR. And then in some cases where the general plan height doesn't quite meet the height of Measure A, you can increase your height. That's kind of what's shown in some of these areas where we have the little plus sign, like, for example, the post office site could increase by 15 feet. And so again, it's a similar process that Andy described. We're kind of in a flux of how the community process will actually work. Right now, similar to Andy's, we've identified it as more of a negotiation, but it looks like we're going to provide some more certainty in the plan. But some of the community benefits that have been prioritized for North Downtown include affordable housing and some of these community gathering spaces that I just described, like plazas. The proposed circulation concepts. Most of the proposed new connections are pedestrian and bicycle improvements. There are no new streets being proposed in North Downtown. So what you see on the plan in the dashed green and blue lines are a combination of bike routes, bike lanes, as well as some areas where there's shared ped and bike facilities. We also show a mid-block pathway connection that's basically an extension of the Brio Drive, because those are very, very large blocks there, and so that would be a way to kind of effectively reduce some of the block size and allow for better connectivity in that area. We've also identified, you can't really see them very well, but there's some little yellow circles at some various intersections where we see room for improvement, such as enhanced crossings, maybe some signalization, and that type of thing. And I think I show a couple of those, on this next slide here. So for example, we show some painted crossings, some enlarged, this is an example of what North California and YVR could look like, with some enlarged pork chops, as I understand some folks call them, otherwise known as pedestrian islands, maybe with some landscaping and a bit more space there to buffer the pedestrians that are waiting while the cars go by, and create a bit more sense of safety and comfort there. Again, similar to the North Downtown, really what we're trying to achieve here is more complete streets approach, where by the amenities and the way that we design streets, we're thinking more holistically about all of the users. So not just those driving their cars, but also prioritizing pedestrians and bicyclists as they move through the North Downtown. Make sure that it's safe, comfortable, convenient for all these different user groups. So next steps, as I mentioned earlier, we're hoping to release a public draft in late June. We then have a number of commission and city council study sessions that we're planning in July and August. So I encourage you to continue to participate. I have up here the project website. If you go to the page right up at the top, there's a place for you to put in your email address. You can stay informed of any upcoming meetings and other ways to be involved in the planning process. So with that, I can take your questions.
Anybody going to be brave and ask a question of Janine? She's very intimidating, I realize.
Where's the CEQA process in this right now?
So CEQA, we also envision having the public draft of the EIR on the street at the same time as the specific plan, so late June.
Keep the conversation going. Have you looked at the new state laws around like the BART proposed law that allows higher density within a half mile of the BART station, or some of the work? I know AB 827 died, but there might be a replacement bill. This area is primarily within that half mile of the BART, and so I'm just thinking about this is a future document that's going to guide planning into the future, looking at how the state is really pushing for much higher density near BART. Does this go far enough, in your opinion, in terms of the amount of housing within that half mile? Especially, I think I'm looking at more of the north of YVR, which is also within that kind of half mile of the BART. It's still mostly auto oriented. Thanks.
Right, so I think we're taking a little bit more context-sensitive approach than what the state is looking at. We were following that, but we understand that, like you said, it wasn't passed. It may come back again next year. But right now, I think we're taking a bit more context-sensitive approach and taking on board, a lot of the feedback that we've gotten from the council and the commissions and how we approach this. We had initially proposed, more FAR outright, but really the direction that we've been receiving from council and the commissions and the committee is to follow the community benefits approach, similar to Andy. So, we are increasing the FAR. For example, north of YVR, most of the FARs there were 0.5. We're increased to 0.6. So those are all going up to 1.5 minimum. So the minimum throughout North Downtown is now going to be 1.5. We're also reducing the setbacks. In a lot of the cases, they were either minor or moderate. We're now reducing everything to minor, and whereas now minor meant like a 2-foot average, it's just a 0. So we're really increasing development potential through that avenue as well. So mostly through FAR and setbacks rather than through height, since height has been such a sensitive issue in this city.
I just had a question on the relationship to the general plan, specific plan zoning. This is a community where there's a lot of zoning type development standards that are actually in the general plan, which could make things a little confusing. And so how is this specific plan going to perhaps solve some of these issues?
Good question. I think that the development standards you're talking about are primarily FAR, height, and setback, where there's maps in the general plan, where the general plan is putting on the kind of the hat of zoning. So in those cases, instead of referring to the general plan, you would refer to the specific plan. So it's almost like you'd have potentially, this is the approach we're envisioning, is where you might have a diagram or that map in the general plan that just refers you to the specific plan.
So for those pedestrian connections, how does that get implemented? So you mentioned the Brio driveway and then a jog.
Yeah, good question. So a lot of the pedestrian connections, some of them require maybe a right-of-way increase, or some of them are along private property. So those would all occur, well, not all of them, but the one that you're referring to, like for example, the Brio, that one would occur with new development. And that's along one of that particular one. A lot of it is along, for example, the post office site. So what we would envision is if they are going to increase their height beyond what's required, or want to increase their FAR, that would be one of the community benefits that they would need to provide, would be that pathway. In other areas, you know, where you know, it would kind of have to happen with as development occurs, because we need, you know, maybe we need to just really redesign that street. So we're looking at ways through the implementation chapter of how we would do that. So maybe what we would do is they would contribute towards, you know, assessment district or that type of mechanism, and then the city, once they had enough money, would go in and make the improvements, or once enough development occurred where it was feasible to make the improvements, the city would go in. So a lot of the pedestrian improvements are longer term improvements that would require, you know, the area to mature and evolve before we could go in and make those improvements.
It looked like there was a lot of new mixed use and ground floor retail. I'm assuming that's what the mixed use and residential component is. Is there a concern of oversaturation of street level retail?
Yeah, that's a good question, and definitely something that was kind of raised earlier in the process when we were doing some stakeholder interviews, particularly with developers. So we kind of have a balance of the yellow versus the purple. The yellow, the retail is encouraged, it's not required. The purple is where it is required. So we were careful not to have it required everywhere, and a little bit more thoughtful about, okay, we want it along these particular streets or street segments where we would want the retail on the ground floor. But it is it is something that we were mindful of.
Follow up to that question: does ground floor, like co-working space, count as retail?
I don't have the answer to that. I think for the MUC, it may count as that. I'm not sure. Do you know the answer to that? It's like an office, like a shared office facility. I'm not sure if office counts for ground floor retail.
So actually, that was something that we addressed in the mixed use zoning, the current mixed use zoning regulations that were adopted in 2016. In fact, in my slideshow for that, when I brought it to council, I had a picture of a building in Berkeley with retail above and a vacant storefront below, and we don't want that here. And so there was actually quite a bit of flexibility built into the zoning, and at least in West Downtown we're carrying that over, and I think perhaps in parts of North Downtown as well, where it's ground floor commercial rather than ground floor retail, except there are some specified street frontages, street block faces where it is more restrictive, and it's, you know, shops and restaurants and all that. But for example, along Mount Diablo Boulevard, especially as you get closer to the freeway, other types of uses that are compatible with retail are allowed, such as, you know, real estate offices and document preparers and a host of banks and a number of other things. So we're trying not to be pie in the sky about, hey, we're going to have cheese shops and bread and all that stuff with apartments everywhere, and it's going to be Paris, because great city, but we're not there yet.
And yeah, building off of what Andy said, I remember now, so thanks for stepping in. Yes, it's ground floor commercial unless you're within 50 feet of a core area of retail street, which is something in the zoning. And we're not proposing to identify any core area retail streets in the North Downtown. We're going to identify areas where we encourage the retail to occur versus the other types of commercial, but we're not going to require it.
So same question for the special districts. Are you restricting the ground floor uses then to things that you would define in the special district?
Similarly, so for example, the Makers Row area, we're encouraging if you produce shoes or a handbag or jewelry, that you sell it, but it's not a requirement. And then in the Arts and Entertainment District, where it's the purple, it's commercial is required on the ground floor, and then we're encouraging certain types of uses, but we're not requiring it.
Any other questions for Janine? Or perhaps Andy as a follow-up? Okay. Well, thank you, Janine. Appreciate
Thank you.
it. So you've done it again. You've spent nearly an hour with all of us here at Walnut Creek, and we appreciate your attendance. I've seen some of the faces in the room that I recognize and appreciate seeing you again. For those in the room who maybe I haven't had an opportunity to meet, I wanted to highlight that we do have a sign-up sheet. Andy alluded to the community benefit process. He'd love to have your card and be able to reach out, but we would love just in the future to be able to reach out to you again and include you on our future mailings, make you more aware of future topics and future forums. And that said, we do have a sign-in sheet. I'll leave it at the back, and if you have not yet filled it out, I did take the liberty of, if I recognized you, I put your name on the list because, oh, Jay's here. Hi, Jay. But that said, if you have not yet signed in or you want to provide some information, contact info, phone, email, we'd appreciate you doing so. Speaking of the future, looking ahead, we will be having another forum in June, and we also have, then we're going to take a break in July, midsummer, those of us who have plans and otherwise go out and enjoy, and then we'll come back again in August. But in June, we may actually have, we did this once before in February, kind of an informal gathering. We actually had some really productive conversations where staff and members of the development community came together. We were up on the third floor conference room, and we're just able to kind of talk through issues, what's going on in specific projects, what are some trends you're noticing, what about that state bill, it was just a very kind of, there wasn't a specific topic to be addressed, but it was an opportunity to exchange, again, some ideas and information, which is at the heart of what this forum is all about and why we started it. So we're thinking about June kind of being that kind of a catch-up session, kind of a leftovers, if you will, right? We've got a couple of things maybe if people want to follow up with. We'll have more details on that as we root that out a bit and send out information. But again, if you could make sure that we do have your info if we don't have it already. And thank you again for spending your morning with us, and we'll see you next month. Thanks.